Hello everybody, my name is Alejandra Bermúdez Rodríguez, and today with my partner Jeferson Ávila, we are going to present to you our social project called The Design of Teaching Materials and Strategies to Overcome Challenges Public Institutions Face in Remote Learning. Now, the pandemic caused by COVID-19 has led to the urgency of implementing new methodologies and strategies to continue the process of learning and teaching as the one of remote learning. However, this modality has not been well adjusted, leading to poor quality in education. Now, in order to overcome the challenges and the shortcomings that remote learning has presented in the recent month, this project aimed to provide EFL teachers from Instituto Técnico Damaso Zapata, whose students are in 6th grade, with relevant strategies and materials in order to minimize the shortcomings remote learning has presented due to the outbreak of COVID-19. This following the specific objectives that are: first, to characterize the needs students and teachers have toward the teaching of English in the current model of learning and teaching based on a specific questionnaire and interviews. Second, to generate a series of teacher education videos for educators in which there is a display of a variety of didactic strategies focused on the proper implementation of remote learning. And third, to create materials and lesson plan banks based on the suggested curriculum so that teachers can have access to different alternatives of English teaching. Now, for the methodology, this social project was framed within the action research methodology in order to understand students' and teachers' perceptions towards the modality implemented in education in order to find the specific solutions that are manifested in the development of materials and strategies. So, as you can see there in figure 1, this figure illustrates the steps to follow throughout the development of our social practice. First, the diagnosis, in which through the questionnaire help us identify the main issues of remote learning. Second, after identifying the problems, it was necessary to elaborate the action plans following different strategies to overcome the identified problems. Third, to implement the materials and strategies created in the action plan, we created an action-taking process. Fourth, once implementation had taken place, it was necessary to assess the process and the outcomes to see if we had contributed to minimize the education shortcomings in the new modality. And during this last step, we intended to reflect on whether the implementation was effective or not and how much knowledge we had gained. Now, for the data collection, 2 types of data collection instruments were implemented to gather enough information about the structure of the new modality, the digital tools adopted for the lesson, and the perception both teachers and students have towards remote learning. These 2 data collection instruments were interviews and questionnaires. Now, let's have a look at their results.
Now, going on with the results of our project, it is necessary to understand the diagnosis. First, regarding teachers' perceptions towards remote learning, regarding the difficulties in planning classes during virtuality, figure 2 shows 66.7% of the teachers stated that the most difficult thing was to think of new ways to evaluate the students. On the other hand, 60% said that the hardest part was redefining the planning of content and the lack of real-time spaces with the students. In addition to that, 46.7% said that the most complicated part was uploading, presenting, and explaining the material to the students. 40% had problems redefining activities. 26.7% did not know digital tools for teaching, and finally, 6.7% said that teaching classes and making guides took too much time. On the other hand, in figure 3, we can see students' perceptions towards remote learning. As can be seen in the graphic, 60.8% of students consider that they have learned very little in the virtual world, while 35.9% consider that they have learned a lot, and 3.3% state that they have learned nothing. In accordance with the graphic, it can be concluded that this new virtual modality has negatively affected students' learning, since more than half of the respondents considers that they have learned very little or nothing. This situation is alarming due to the fact that this modality has been developed throughout the scholarly year and becomes a great challenge not only for the students but also for the teachers as agents of the teaching learning process. And now, taking into consideration this problematic and more answers from the survey that we carried out, it was necessary to plan some activities to overcome the shortcomings that this pandemic has brought to the educational field. So first, the first thing that we did was 3 sets of educational videos The set of educational videos had the purpose for teachers to watch these videos whenever they feel like, for them to know some topics, tips, and pieces of advice to carry out in class. The first video was about the methodologies to take into consideration or consider when developing the class. The second video was about tips for classroom management, and the third one was web pages, tools, and materials for teachers to know when designing their lessons. Finally, the lesson plans were designed based on plan the area for 6th graders. In this part, we decided to create a whole term, especially or specifically the third term. In these folders, we are going to find 10 lesson plans for each week, and in these lesson plans, we're going to find links, worksheets, materials, and games for the teachers to use whenever they feel like. Now we're going to go with the conclusions.
Now, in terms of the conclusions and recommendations, before the interventions and thanks to the questionnaires and interviews applied, we could identify that teachers have limited access to ICTs, and also 3 main problems were identified: lesson development, class management, and availability of tools and resources in remote learning. This was what would help us to create the strategies and materials that students and teachers needed to overcome these problems. Now, after the intervention, we managed to plan a whole term with its materials and perfectly explain activities and procedures that teachers will have access to in a Google Drive folder. Now, the generation of 3 instructional videos also was needed, such as remote learning methodology and lesson development, classroom management tips, and educational tools for teachers in remote learning. Now, in general terms, this whole experience was very enriching. And in terms of a specific learning gained through this experience, as preserving teachers, we strongly acknowledge the importance of innovating in the field of education with the purpose of making students more critical and independent when it comes to problem solving and learning to learn. Now, in terms of further intervention or research, although the focal point of this project was to solve certain issues towards remote learning, there is still the need to work on the students who unfortunately have not had the opportunity to be present in remote classes due to the lack of resources and infrastructures in their houses. Also, it is very important to create strategies and materials that can benefit more grades of the whole institution and not only our specific population, which was 6th graders. Now, this, you can see the most important references that were used for this social project. And if you happen to read the whole paper, please scan the code there and you will find it. Thank you so much for your attention.